What if the silence of a single woman could shatter the illusions of a house built on centuries of cruelty? What if one whisper, disguised as obedience, became the sharpest blade of all? It was 1865 in South Carolina, a year of endings and a year of ghosts. Outside the grand plantation house, magnolia blossoms clung to their branches, their sweetness masking the smell of sweat, soil, and sorrow. Inside, candles burned against the velvet curtains of the big house, their glow falling across crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and plates heavy with roasted meats. Masters and mistresses laughed over wine, their voices rising in arrogant harmony, certain the world belonged to them still, even as war cannons thundered far away, and rumors crept closer with every passing week. But beyond those walls, the slave quarters sat in heavy silence. Cracked wood, dirt floors, and bodies that carried the weight of chains, even when no iron clinked. Their laughter was not heard. Their hunger was not ease. Their prayers were whispered, trembling between fear and hope, while the gospel that preached mercy was twisted into a lash. Among them was Martha, thin, quiet, scarred by years she no longer counted. To the big house, she was invisible. To the quarters, she was a vessel of patience, a woman who listened more than she spoke, who carried wounds behind her eyes. Yet in her silence, something was building. The night of feasts and sermons was not her world. But she watched it carefully, storing every gesture, every arrogance, like kindling stacked in the dark. For Martha had decided the only way to survive was not with the lash, not with the knife, but with deception sharp enough to make the powerful tremble. And soon she would turn illusion into her weapon. The year was 1865, and South Carolina stood on the trembling edge of collapse. The Civil War raged in its final months, its smoke drifting through the fields as if the earth itself had grown tired of blood. The plantations still held their routines: cotton picked, tobacco dried, hemp bundled for rope and profit. But the certainty of their masters had begun to fray. Rumors of Sherman's march burned through the quarters faster than fire through dry pine. Some said freedom was already written in Washington. Others said it was only a cruel lie, another promise to vanish like smoke. The plantation of the Rutledge family stood as if untouched by these tides. A wide, white house with columns that imitated the proud marble of Rome, overlooked the endless rows of cotton. From its high balcony, the master spoke of providence, declaring that the land was his by divine order. His wife echoed scripture, her voice soft with piety when read aloud from her gilded Bible, but sharp with cruelty when she ordered lashes for the tired or silence for the hungry. Hypocrisy was stitched into the very fabric of the house. Mercy for Sunday sermons, violence for Monday mornings. The plantation was not only a house of cotton, but of numbers. In the master's ledger, names were reduced to lines of property, valued alongside mules and barrels of rice. Each life was priced in ink, strong backs worth more than frail ones, children measured in potential yield. In those pages, Martha's name had once been written. Besides it, the mark of a woman sold at 17, her value determined by her womb and her hands. She had seen the ledger. She remembered the way the master's finger traced down the page, as if Martha's life was a map of scars. She had lost a brother to the fever, that swept through the quarters one winter, and a sister sold to another plantation before she had even reached womanhood. Her mother's hands had once braided her hair at dusk, humming survival songs carried from a coast across the ocean. But her mother's voice had grown hoarse, her body broken by labor, until she was lowered into the red Carolina soil. Martha carried those songs still, though she never sang them aloud. She wore them like invisible armor. The overseer, a man named Griggs, patrolled the rows with his whip coiled at his side. He was quick to punish, slow to forgive, his cruelty disguised as discipline. Children feared his shadow. Men clenched their jaws in silence when his boots approached. The lash was not only pain, it was reminder. A crack across the skin meant the system still held, even as war gnawed at its edges. Yet beneath that system, life went on in the quarters. At night, when the fields emptied and the overseer's steps faded, voices would rise in whispered rhythm. Songs of sorrow, prayers woven into melody, stories of ancestors who had walked free lands, stories of spirits who guided the lost. They whispered not only to remember, but to survive. And Martha listened. By day, she seemed subdued, moving with bowed head, speaking little. But inside her quiet gaze, she gathered fragments. The mistress's daily reliance on her servants, the master's pride in his routine, the exact moments the big house believed itself untouchable. She learned when the food was prepared, when the wine was poured, when the ledgers were left on the desk without guard. She understood the weakness that arrogance creates, the blindness of those who think themselves eternal. And so the stage was set. A house built on lies stood tall in the South Carolina sun, while in its shadow a woman plotted not with rage, but with patience. Martha's weapon would not be fire nor blade, but illusion, an idea so dangerous that once released, it could not be undone. The days on the Rutledge plantation stretched long, each one repeating the last with the monotony of chains. Dawn came with the overseer's whistle, its shrill note piercing the fog that clung to the fields. Men and women stepped into rows of cotton with shoulders already bowed. Children, too young to bear sacks, scattered along the dirt paths, chased off with curses, or set to carry water jugs heavier than their arms. Hunger was an old companion, and the promise of rations, a small portion of cornmeal or salted pork, was never enough to silence the body's gnawing. Martha endured all of it with her practiced silence. She bent to the rows when commanded, cleaned when ordered, and carried messages between house and field. Her skin bore the pale ridges of lashings, reminders of times when she had failed to move quickly enough, when exhaustion slowed her hands, or when her eyes met the overseer's too long. Each scar was a story written without her consent, but she did not speak of them. She allowed the quarters to see her calm, even when grief simmered beneath. The children of the Rutledge family mocked her as they pleased. They had inherited the cruelty of their elders like it were a second language. "Martha, fetch this. Martha, sing us a song. Martha, dance like the monkey you are." Their laughter filled the halls of the big house as she obeyed. But behind her lowered eye, she memorized each insult, tucking them into the same quiet ledger where she kept every wound. In the quarters, resilience whispered through the nights. Women hummed low songs while mending torn garments, their voices a steady rhythm that kept the dark at bay. The men, weary from the fields, sometimes carved wood into small shapes: birds, crosses, fragments of something resembling freedom. They spoke in hushed tones about the war, about the Union armies drawing nearer, about Lincoln's proclamation, about freedom that might come like a storm. Yet doubt always followed. Could freedom truly reach them? Or would the Rutledges twist the law as they twisted scripture, finding ways to bind them still? Martha listened to it all. She rarely spoke, but her silence was never emptiness. She was measuring, weighing, and learning. She noted how the mistress trusted her most of all the servants, how she sent Martha to fetch herbs for her medicines, how she leaned on her to prepare trays when sickness struck the master. Martha had seen the way wine dulled the master's senses, how his temper was softened when the drink flowed like water. She knew the kitchen's rhythm, the pantry's storage, the hidden jars where powders were kept for ailments. She studied illusion the way others studied scripture. It was the feast that sharpened her plan. Word spread in early spring that the Rutledges would host a gathering, a final display of wealth, as if to shout against the crumbling Confederacy that their dominion remained intact. Carriages would arrive from neighboring estates. The big house would gleam with candles. There would be laughter and arrogance, and more food than the quarters might see in a year. The mistress fussed endlessly over preparations, polishing silver, laying linens, instructing the cooks until her voice broke into shrill complaints. In the quarters, the talk of the feast was bitter. "They'll eat till the floorboards groan while we chew air," one woman whispered. Another murmured, "Maybe the Yankees will come before their dessert is finished." But Martha remained quiet. She knew such gatherings held both danger and opportunity. The big house would be swollen with pride, blind with indulgence. The mistress would depend on her more than ever. The days leading up to the feast grew tense. Overseer Griggs lashed harder, as if his whip could enforce perfection. He barked that no blemished cotton should be left unpicked, no servant found idle, no mistake tolerated. The quarters grew silent under his shadow, but resentment thickened like smoke filling a room with no windows. Every strike of his whip fed the embers of anger that smoldered unseen. On the morning of the feast, Martha woke before dawn. She sat in the dim glow of a dying fire in the quarters, her hands folded in her lap. She thought of her mother's songs, of her sister's face disappearing down the road in a slave trader's wagon, of her brother's body wrapped in coarse cloth. She thought of the ledger where her worth had been reduced to numbers. That morning, she decided the ledger would no longer hold her name. Her movements were deliberate. She entered the big house as ordered, carrying trays, fetching bowls of fruit, and preparing wine for the guests who would soon arrive. She observed each step, each gesture, as though she were part of a carefully rehearsed play. No one questioned her presence. She was invisible, essential only in her obedience. That invisibility would be her cloak. By evening, the feast began. Carriages rolled up the dirt road, wheels crunching over gravel. Horses steaming in the cool air. Women in silks and men in coats embroidered with fading wealth stepped inside, their voices booming with false confidence. They spoke of the Confederacy as if it were not already bleeding to death, as if the plantations would stand untouched forever. Their arrogance was armor against the truth, and they wore it proudly. Martha moved among them silently, setting platters, refilling glasses, her face expressionless. Yet inside, her mind was racing. She noted the way the master lifted his goblet without looking, trusting the servant who placed it in his hand. She saw the mistress laughing with her guests, oblivious to the way Martha lingered by the table of bottles and decanters. The illusion of their power was complete, and in that illusion lay their greatest weakness. As laughter roared through the hall and music swelled from a hired fiddler, Martha's plan solidified. She would not strike with fire or blade, not tonight. She would strike with something sharper, fear. Fear that would linger long after the feast ended. Fear that would unravel the certainty of the Rutledge name. Her weapon was deception, the suggestion of death itself. In quarters that night, whispers traveled through the shadows. Some prayed for strength, others for deliverance. Martha, however, carried her silence like a blade. She would not pray for rescue. She would create her own. The big house did not yet know it, but the night of its feast would become the night of its greatest illusion. A death that never was. A deception that could unbind chains. And Martha, unseen by those who believed they owned her, would begin the performance that might lead her to freedom. The hall of the big house shimmered with light. Dozens of candles flickered against gilt-framed portraits, their flames casting shadows that wavered like ghosts on the plastered walls. Laughter thundered from the dining table, swollen with meats and breads, with bowls of stewed apples glistening in fat, with wines poured until the floor itself seemed drunk on arrogance. The master sat at the head, his cheeks flushed, his voice booming as he told stories of battles he had never fought, victories he had only claimed through ink and ledgers. His guests clapped, raising goblets that caught the light like weapons of pride. And through it all, Martha moved unnoticed. Her steps were soundless, her face lowered, her hands steady as she carried trays and poured wine. No one wondered at the stillness in her gaze. No one considered that a woman stripped of voice might yet shape the night itself. In the kitchen, she lingered. A jar sat on the shelf among herbs and powders, roots ground for aches, leaves steeped for fever. The mistress herself had often instructed Martha on their use, praising her reliability, her memory. Tonight, Martha's hands found the jar as though guided by something older than instruction. It was not poison she took, but a bitter powder that mimicked death when swallowed in measure, slowed the breath, stilled the pulse, drained the skin of warmth. She had watched it once, when the mistress dosed a servant too heavily by mistake. The girl had seemed gone for hours before breath returned. Martha held the powder as if it were fire itself. She knew it could not free her with certainty, but it could unbind the chains of perception, and perception was all the master owned. She returned to the hall, the jar hidden beneath her apron folds. The master lifted his goblet, demanding more wine. Martha obeyed, her hands steady as she tilted the bottle, her other hand sprinkling the faintest shadow of powder into the cup. She set it before him, with the same bowed head as always. He drank without suspicion. Minutes passed. Laughter echoed, fiddles played, and the hall roared with arrogance. Then, slowly, silence crept. The master's voice faltered. His goblet slipped, spilling red across the tablecloth like blood. His face drained, his body slumped backward in his chair. For a breathless moment, the hall froze. Then chaos erupted. "Dear God!" the mistress shrieked, rushing to his side. Guests leapt from their chairs, calling for aid, shouting prayers, pounding his chest with desperate hands. The overseer burst into the hall, his whip still dangling at his side, his eyes wide with fear. Servants scattered, pressing themselves against the walls, trembling as the master's world cracked open. Martha stood among them, silent, unseen. She had given the illusion of death, and it spread like fire through dry timber. Guests whispered of stroke, of poison, of God's wrath. The mistress clutched her Bible, screaming that sin had struck her house. And all the while, Martha slipped away from the ring, her absence unnoticed in the storm. Behind her, the big house quaked with panic. The master's lips were pale, his breath shallow but present. Yet no one knew. They saw only death, and in that illusion, the house revealed its truth. Its grandeur was fragile, its certainty an illusion, its power as mortal as any man's breath. Martha's steps carried her out into the night. She walked past the kitchen yard, past the rows of cotton silvered by moonlight, past the quarters where whispers stirred like wind through leaves. Each step was steady, her silence louder than any cry. Behind her, the house still stood tall on lies, but tonight, the fire spoke truth. The big house did not sleep that night. Panic echoed through its halls as the guests rushed, prayed, shouted, and wailed over the master's motionless body. Some swore he was gone. Others claimed to feel the faintest stir of breath. The mistress knelt beside him, her hands clutching the Bible as though its gilt pages could conjure life. Overseer Griggs stormed from room to room, demanding answers, threatening servants, and brandishing his whip with desperation. Yet no lash could strike truth from the shadows, for the illusion had already taken root. The master was dead, or as good as dead. Outside, the night carried Martha's absence like a secret. She did not return to the quarters or the kitchens. Some said they saw her moving past the cotton fields, her figure small beneath the moon, her steps vanishing into the pine woods beyond. Others claimed she slipped into the river, letting its dark current carry her away. None could be certain. The only certainty was this: when dawn broke, Martha was gone. The plantation reeled. Guests departed hastily, whispering of poison and divine judgment, unwilling to remain in a house cursed by sudden death. The mistress withdrew into her chambers, her cries muffled behind locked doors. Griggs scoured the fields for Martha, hunting with dogs, swearing vengeance, but the earth gave no sign. Tracks blurred in the dew, the woods swallowed their own paths, and the river spoke no secrets. In the quarters, silence ruled at first. To speak Martha's name was dangerous, but silence never lasted long, where memory ached to be carried. By firelight, the whispers returned. They told of a woman who tricked the master into believing himself dead, who walked free while the house trembled. They told it with pride, with awe, with a shiver of fear, for her act was both defiance and mystery. She fooled death itself, some said. She carried death in her pocket, said others. In every version, Martha became larger than herself, less woman than legend. The ledger, however, told no such story. When the master revived days later, weak but alive, his first command was to erase her name. Martha was declared missing property, her value crossed through in ink as though she had never been. No official record spoke of her again. To the world of ledgers and laws, she was gone, not free, not dead, simply erased. Years passed. The war ended. Freedom was declared, though freedom came like a storm, violent, uneven, and leaving ruin in its wake. The Rutledge plantation faltered. Cotton fields grew wild. The columns of the big house cracked. The mistress died within those walls, clutching the same Bible that had once blessed lash and sermon alike. The master lingered, a shadow of himself, his name fading from memory as surely as his wealth. But Martha's story did not die. It traveled through time, not in ink, but in whispers, carried by the children of those who had worked the fields, passed from tongue to tongue like a secret hymn. They said she walked north, reaching the Union lines and freedom. They said she lived under another name, raising children who never knew the lash. Others claimed she was taken by the river, her spirit rising with the mist each dawn. No tale agreed, yet none denied that she had slipped the chains. A century later, visitors who wandered the ruins of the Rutledge plantation spoke of strange things. A chair in the dining hall that seemed always to topple over, as if an unseen hand knocked it aside. A faint scent of bitter herbs lingered in the kitchen, no matter how many years had passed. And at times, on quiet nights, some swore they saw a woman's shadow moving across the fields, steady and silent, walking toward the woods without turning back. What is truth and what is memory? History writes in ledgers, but legends write in whispers. Martha left no grave, no record, no inevitable fate. Only the echo of a question. Was she erased, or did she erase them?